This is the Edison Giocattoli 3-in-1 Secret Agent Gun. This is a sort of a checkout lane toy that you could buy in the 1980s, early 1980s. These are made in Italy, or were made in Italy, and they haven't been for sale for some time. But these were used in the production of the 1986 film Aliens by James Cameron. You'll probably remember the scene when they're about to go look for all of the colonists that are overtaken by the aliens, and ultimately almost all of them are dead. And they order everybody to, for some reason, unload all their weapons, because that makes sense. That particular thing is referred to in the Aliens Colonial Marine Tech Manual, which is apparently canon, as the DV9 battery, which is supposedly you unplug it and it keeps the weapon from firing. It's a connection between the weapon and the aiming system that they wear on their face. And then this toy was also used to make another prop. It's simply referred to as the belt tool. 6 of the actors who played the Colonial Marines had them on their equipment. And it is, like I said, just referred to as the belt tool. Nobody knows what it was actually for, but I have a second one. So I'm going to make both props just because I can. And these things, while hard to find, are not necessarily rare. These things were just cheap toys that were made en masse. And you can still find them pretty regularly on eBay. In fact, a lot of people that are my age that grew up in the 80s probably have one stored in the basement somewhere, their parents' house, in their old box of toys. But yeah, the belt tool itself is actually even simpler because they just removed this handle here and then painted it. But we'll get into the paint side of it later because that's a whole other rabbit hole to go down. They came in a blister pack, so they'd have a card and then blister over them. And it had a bunch of these little darts with it. These are the darts here. And if I recall, I think they were on a sprue, like a soft rubber sprue, because these are really squishy soft rubber. Well, they're not really squishy. They're actually quite dense little darts. And what you'd do is you'd load one here in the end, and then you'd unfold it. Ooh, no one would know that that was a gun of any kind. But now that you've unfolded it, clearly that's what it is. And then you take aim at a sibling, and off it goes. Oh dear. That's probably broken. But yeah, that's all that these toys were. And I'm not sure where the 3-in-1 comes from. I don't recall what the 3 different functions of it were at all. Maybe, no, that doesn't really make any sense. But yeah, that's all that those props were. But the first thing we got to do is we have to disassemble it because there's a pretty powerful spring in here. So we're going to get ye olde Phillips head screwdriver and take it apart. Phillips. So here it is completely disassembled. You have all of your internal springs, your screws, the 2 little arms. This is the business that actually fires the little dart, and then a little locking clip that goes in there. The only part of this that you actually need to make the DV9 battery, or whatever it's actually called, are these 2 internal sleeves and these 2 parts here. Everything else is entirely unnecessary for this build. No other part of it is needed. Just these 2 bits here. Now, these 2 parts, the 2 black parts, these are the outer pieces. Those will remain largely unaffected. This, however, you need to cut it. You need to cut it to size. To do that, what you do is you just snap it back together. You don't need to screw it. There's a little pin in here that this rail slides back and forth on. You need to put it back in there, attach these 2 sides together. And then this is the rear. This is where the muzzle is, where the barrel is. You need to pull this all the way back because you're going to cut it right along this line here because you need this block sticking out and this little bit hanging out here. And then you're going to cut all of the gray out. So I will show you what I'm talking about here in a second when I cut it myself. So we're going to go ahead and mark this guy. So once you have it all the way to the rear, take you an X-Acto knife, and we're going to use this just to mark it because we're going to actually cut this on the bandsaw. Just scribe a nice line right where the black and the gray meet, because that's exactly where you're going to cut it. And make sure you've got it pushed all the way to the rear so that you get your cut in the right place. The other end of this isn't going to be as difficult because it's kind of already marked itself. You're going to cut it right where that little shoulder is, because all of this business up here has got to go, because that's not there at all in the prop. And then we're going to cut it here and here, both ends, both sides, and then we'll get right back to it. Now all these parts are cut to size, and what you're looking for is, remember, you've got a little slot in here that this fits in still. You still have some of it left. All the way to the rear, to where that's nested in there quite well. This is going to end up being flush. I need to sand this down. I didn't want to cut it too close. And then back here, right along this edge, this whole thing needs to be flush. I'm going to have to add a little bit of putty in there. Got a little too excited with that one. But you should have this little corner bit sticking down, and then this will end up being flush back here. And with both halves put together, that's a very nearly finished prop once I get all that sanded down and cleaned up. But I'm going to use this 20,000 sheet styrene to plug both ends so that it's nice and flush. Get it all sanded and puttied up, and then we'll come back. So this thing's cut down to length. I got it plugged on both ends with Plasticard, and I made some laser cut plugs here on the end to give some positive purchase for these male plugs on the end, so that they'd have something to attach to. So that's more or less what you end up with once it's ready to be, don't run away, once it's ready to be assembled. So now we have to assemble it, and assembly is extremely simple. Got your little slidey guy there, and then these are just gonna get screwed back together, but we need to get this fixed in place. So that's the fixed position there. So I'm actually just going to use some good old cyanoacrylate super glue to put it in place. I don't need a whole lot. I just need it to sit in one spot the whole time. Make sure you cap it. I always have a bad tendency of never capping this stuff, and I end up losing quite a bit of glue because of it. All right, that's spread out. A little bit of super glue accelerator. And there'll probably have to be a little bit of sanding at the end once we're done. But we'll recover from our spare parts pile, our screws here, and then we can start putting this guy back together. Okay. So there's that. These bits sticking out on the end, they're fine. These are just little draft board plugs that I made so that these guys can sit in here. And now I will go ahead and secure those in place once again. Ye olde super glue. Just a bit, not much is needed. And I made these pretty resistance fit, so they'd be quite snug. And then make sure that it's all even Steven, nice and straight. Pretty good. And there you go. That is the completely built prop right there. That's literally it. Just that. Now for the extremely complex part of making the belt tool, which we need our other Giocatelli 3-in-1 super secret agent gun. And this is a very complex process to make this part. You got to take out some screws, just like you did with the last one. Magnetic bits. Now, the only thing we're actually doing here is removing this. The rest of it stays. So I don't want to upset the position of the spring. So I'm going to try and take this apart without actually fully taking it apart. Success. Look at that. Professional. There, belt tool done. That's really all there is to it, is just removing this arm. And then I have seen some people, they make this prop and they put a small metal ring here, but I have not seen that on screen at all. I don't know if that's just interpretation. But these are the two props used in the movie Aliens. I just moved the camera, sorry about that. There is a different version of this that actually has 4 barrels at the end. I've seen that a couple of times. I've never actually seen one in real life. The only version of this I've seen is this. I don't know if that's the more accurate one for the belt tool or for this one, but the body parts are the same. So I guess you can use either one for at least the battery. You don't necessarily need that one. I think you actually need the single barrel one for the belt tool. So we're going to go ahead and get these ready for priming. And I'm actually just going to prime them as they're together because, well, this one's pretty much sealed together now. So we'll just go with that. And then we'll come back once the primer's dry. There they are, all primed up. Just primed up with some simple Rust-Oleum gray primer. You can find the Amazon affiliate link below for this gray primer that I used. Now we're going to paint it. Now the paint on these is a bit odd because on screen, everything that the Colonial Marines carry as far as equipment goes, except their armor, and what I mean is their weapons, the motion tracker, the welders, it all appears to be olive drab on screen. But the actual props were not painted olive drab. They were painted with Humbrol Brown Bess, and Humbrol is the paint company, and the Brown Bess is the name of the paint, and it's a very specific shade of brown. Now, that specific shade of brown with the cameras at the time and the lighting showed up as sort of an olive green color. Now, Humbrol Brown Bess isn't really available anymore. In fact, it's not available anymore. Humbrol doesn't exist, and if you do find a little tin of Humbrol paint, because they came in these neat little metal tins that you needed a screwdriver to open, it's likely dried up to the point where it's a little better than a rock. So you have to find an alternative paint. And in the great Pantones of brown, one comes out as being pretty close, and that's Vallejo acrylic leather brown, and it's 70.871, and you can find the link for the Amazon link for that below. This is pretty close to Brown Bess, so I'm going to paint them in this leather brown to simulate Brown Bess, because that's as close as we can get today, since the closest we can get is this leather brown. Now before I do that though, I need to paint the metal parts of this, which is actually just the audio jacks, and I'm going to paint the entirety of them in a metallic color, and I'm going to use Vallejo's metal color aluminum 77.701. Again, link below. These are really great running out of an airbrush. If you have to do it with a spray can, there's a couple of different aluminizer paints you can use if you choose to go this route that I'm going to do, because I'm going to have some wear, especially on the tool, the belt tool part. And then I do actually need to do a little tint of red, because one of the surviving props, this one here, you can still see a little bit of red on it. And I'm not sure if I want to duplicate that or if I just want to make these as sort of as if they are real things. But yeah, we'll start with airbrushing this, and then once that's dry, then we'll move on to the Brown Bess, the leather brown, if you will. So there they are. They're all flat coated now, and now I got to mask this off before we paint it, because I don't want to have to repaint this. And the reason that I painted them all completely aluminum is because I'm going to go and I'm going to do a chipping technique that's actually fairly old. It's actually one that was taught to me by my father. See, I grew up with a father who had been a model builder since there was plastic models, because some of the very early plastic model kits were made by a company called Penguin, and this is back in the 50s that those were made, and he remembered building those as a child and going to the dime store when it was an actual dime store and buying models for 29 cents or however cheap they were back then. So I grew up in a household that was pretty much filled with model kits at some point. One of these days I'll upload I'll scan all the photographs of his model collection that he had at one point. He is sadly no longer with us, but when he passed away, I inherited about 3,500 model kits from him. So I've been a model maker and model builder for over 30 years, largely because of him. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to paint this with our stand-in for brown bess. Remember, it's this leather brown by Vallejo, and then we'll weather it. Now remember, I'm doing this to look like how the props were made by production, not how they appeared on screen. If I was going to do it how they appeared on screen, I would do this in sort of an olive drab. But again, I'm going to make them look like the props from production. So leather brown, stand-in for brown bess by Humbrol, which is no longer available. So here we go. All right, all painted up now with our stand-in color for brown bess. I apologize for the background noise. I had to turn my vent fan back on, and my 3D printer is running. So the old method that I was talking about that my dad taught me actually just involves a little bit of tape. Now this paint, I've only let it dry for about maybe 20 minutes or so, thereabouts. So it's just a piece of low-tack tape. Try not to knock everything over while you're doing it. And then just take it and tag it down. Rub it into the high spots a little bit, and then peel it away quickly. Now since that the aluminum paint underneath has been flat coated, it will stay in place. And it'll just pull up some of the not quite cured paint above it. So you get a chipping effect that looks like it should. It's not over the top. You don't have to go back over with a brush or any of the other methods to do chipping. And this is just a really quick way to do it. And you do have to rub it in pretty hard sometimes to get it to come up. See, just like that. Now imagine something like this. It'd see quite a bit of use. So it would get chipped up. And the way it looked like it was just hanging on some equipment while it was attached to the power cable to the smart weapon. So it would probably get banged around quite a bit. And then this button right here, that would probably see quite a bit of use. I don't know if it's intended to actually be a button, who knows, since this is actually a toy pop gun standing in for a battery. So maybe that button serves no purpose, but we'll imagine it does. And then when your tape starts to get too filled with oil or paint or whatever, you just get you a new piece of tape. See, that looks nice. That's exactly what you want. So we'll actually pull a new piece of tape so that we have some strong tag. And I'm about out on this roll. Yeah, just pulling up just a little bit. Don't want to overdo it because, oh, looks like I missed a bit of paint right there. I'll have to go back over that. Yeah, that's starting to look good. Like a properly worn piece of equipment. If you're a collector of military equipment, you'll know that military equipment gets beat up pretty regularly. And if you served in the military, you know that military equipment gets beat up pretty regularly. So, because that's just kind of the nature of things. So this thing's going to be a bit banged about, especially since it's part of a weapon system. And since it appears to be an exposed part of a weapon system, it's going to see some wear. So we'll have to shoot some paint right there where I apparently missed it a little bit. But before this cures, we'll go back and do this one too. And I'm actually going to use a little bit of higher tack tape because I am out of blue tape. Just rub it on there pretty strong. And peel it away. Get a nice chipping effect that's semi-natural. Now, I know probably a lot of people are familiar with this method, but this is the first one that I learned. And since I learned it back in the 80s, and this prop is from the 80s, that's my excuse for using it. See, that tape gets gunked up pretty fast, so. Bump the camera again. Ah, yes, that's correct, right there. Don't want to overdo it. Go to the other side, though. Take a little bit more off. Got a little spot right there. That's fine. Oh, yes. Just like that. Of course, I did pull up a little bit too much paint. I think I rubbed a bit too hard, which you can do. So we'll have to go back and clean that up a little bit, and that's okay. And always go back and hide the crimes. Just a little bit of chipping here and there. I like how that looks. That's looking good. That's also looking good. I'm okay with that. Okay. Now it's time to do a little bit of washing. All right, for our wash, I'm actually just going to do this really, really simply. I'm just going to do a really simple black wash over it. Now I'm not going to flat coat this or gloss coat it to begin with, because I want it to kind of stain the paint a little bit. Dab off the excess. It's good for that guy. Now this guy. I haven't uncovered the audio jacks yet because I'm going to weather them separately and in a different way. Yeah. Ooh, bit much there. It's okay. Yeah, that's looking good. It's looking correct, as my dad would say. Okay, let that dry. Now those are dry enough, at least for what we're going to do. A couple layers of wash. That brings out the detail nicely. So now we're going to go ahead and do our final weathering, which we're going to use kind of a combination of stuff. A little bit of weathering powder by Tamiya, or Tamiya, however you pronounce it. Some MIG pigment, and a little bit of Tamiya panel line fluid. Accent color is what they call it. You can find links for all these in the description below if you want to test them out, or if you've never used them or never heard of them. It's darker business. Now these things come with a brush, but I toss them as soon as I get them because I never have a use for them. I just use a regular, fairly medium thickness, medium density brush. This one is, what is this one? This is a number 4 brush that I use, and this is actually just a cheapie because you pretty much don't want to use them for paint afterwards because you get gritty paint after that. But this is all, the technique is just fairly light strokes of the brush to leave a little bit of this, what amounts to chalk, on the higher points of the model. First couple passes, you're not going to really see much. And that's starting to make things pop. Hopefully the light's picking that up for the camera a little bit. But it is starting to make the detail pop a little bit. It's going to soften a lot of the detail and bring it out ever so slightly. And just start to make things pop a little bit more. And then we'll move on to a lighter color. And it'll add sort of the effect of a little bit of grime here and there, even though the military regularly cleans its stuff, or at least is supposed to. Doesn't mean they always do it. It doesn't mean they get everything. So now we'll move to a little bit of a lighter color. And be careful when you go to a very light color over dark like this, that you don't use too much. Because it'll go way too far, way too fast. And if you do inadvertently put too much on there, you can always blend it with your finger. Alright, and that's probably enough with the weathering powder business. These look fairly well worn. Nice and faded. I'm going to use this just around the base where the audio jacks are in. That way it gives it a nice demarcation. And this has a tiny little brush in it so that you can apply it. And this is actually enamel, not acrylic. And that gives it a nice little bit of staining down there, which it probably would accumulate some filth down at that end. I don't know what happened there. I really don't. We'll have to repaint that. Well, it sucks. Oh well, mistakes get made. And the best part about this stuff is because of capillary effect, it just pulls itself around into the crevices and the creases. For someone who's been used to just building and not really talking about it while he's doing it, it's something for me to get used to actually remember that I have maybe an audience that's listening to me, that maybe has an interest in what I'm doing, and that I need to explain what I'm doing and give details, which is a little weird for me, admittedly. So I apologize if I omit anything or fail to mention something. All right, now we're going to let all that dry before we apply this business. Although we do have some work with this one. This is the rust and metal, orange rust, gunmetal, silver, which we're going to use to clean up a little bit of the chipping, and probably one of these audio jacks. But we'll come back when that's dry. MIG Productions pigments. They're great for weathering, but they are the definition of a little bit goes a long way. You can ruin something really quick with this stuff, or at least I can. So I'm going to be very sparing with it, because it is like a good cup of coffee, very strong. Okay, so maybe not that strong. Well, I went ahead and I just repainted it. I actually repainted this in Tamiya olive green, or olive drab rather. Tamiya TS5. Link below. Amazon. Blah. Yeah, so now I'll weather it. I'm not going to make you sit through the weathering part of it. I'll just go ahead and do it. And that's it. The two props made from the Edison Giocatelli 3-in-1 secret agent gun. The belt tool and the DV9 battery for the M56 smart weapon. That's very simple props. It's pretty much some parts off, 2 parts added, and a repaint, and that's the extent of it. And that's exactly what was done by the production company. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button, and also my Patreon page, which will help actually purchase more parts that I can use to make more props in the future. Thank you again. Cheers.